Hi everyone, Zoe here. Now this video is not like any other I've done for Survival Mistakes, and it really sort of digs into where I get inspired from when I come up with video ideas. Because I got a long list of like hundreds, which I need to film. But I get inspired by video games, by TV shows, by animes, all these things. I look at something and go, I wonder if I can use that in a video. So for this one, I want you to close your eyes. I'm going to say a series of words, and I want you to think of the first thing that pops into your head when I say it. Maybe you can put it in the comments. Directed energy weapon. What are you thinking of? Through history there's been quite a few examples. Flamethrowers being the most obvious one. Railguns, debatable to an extent from what I can understand. And the one that pops into my head, lasers. Now using photons to start a fire, for example, isn't a particularly radical idea. That's what we do whenever we use a solar fire starting method. But when I think of lasers, I think of laser guns. Now there are millions of examples across all of fiction and some experimentation in real life. But it basically takes electricity stored in a battery, and using a laser turns that into photons, which we can then create heat and start a fire. I'm going to try and make a laser pistol. Now my inspiration for this, because every time I think of laser pistol, it's why I've had to change my top. Because this is a little bit cosplay-y. And yes, it's the same style, but it's not the same green as my continuity top, and I wouldn't really expect you to get the reference just based on that. But maybe you'll get it based on this. When I put on a Letterman jacket with leather sleeves and a red body. Do you get the reference now? Anyone? When I think of laser pistols, I think of Captain N, the Game Master. So if you're a frequent watcher of the channel, you'll find that my microphone has a tendency not to work. So of course most of this narration is being done retrospectively. So what I've got right here, this is the laser diode I bought. It's a blue laser. And all I've done is strip the ends off because I'm not going to use that connector. And what you're basically seeing here is the very, very sort of early prototyping to make sure it actually works. And yeah, crocodile clips, because I am pretty terrible at electronics. And they're a nice little catch-all. So even if you've never done anything with electronics before, this is quite an easy project. And as you can see, I've had some experience with these NES zappers. This was a Batgirl grappling gun prop I had for a costume. And I just thought I'd recycle it, because it's going to be the same space anyway as this Captain N one. As I say, if anyone doesn't know, Captain N is a 1989 cartoon, I think it was by DIC Entertainment, DIC Entertainment, that was licensed by Nintendo. The original actual idea came up by a Nintendo employee for their Nintendo Power magazine, and there's quite a good online article about how it was essentially stolen from him. So, as we've seen, I've been chatting away and this process has been going on. This is sort of still the prototyping. The trigger still doesn't work because I've not actually synced it up yet, so we're still on the on-off switch of the battery. That's all that's controlling it right now, the battery pack. And now we're going to change the reshell. Or we're going to change it and put it in a different shell. So this is your original 1985 Zapper. The original colour was actually grey and white when it was the Famicom. And in the very, very early years of the NES, that was also what you got in the American market. And I think European only got the orange because of obviously the sort of issues with replica firearms. And basically we've got this sort of outside shell here. We take that off, it's only 3 Phillips head screws, and then that just exposes the rest of it. It's basically a clamshell sort of design, and to get into it we've got 2 more screws here in the handle, another one there, and then am I going to point to what I'm going to? Yes. And then we've got 2 flat heads there, which completely threw me because I thought it was all Phillips heads, but as you take it off you can see the inner working gubbins. It's pretty standard for a light gun. We've got a weight to counterbalance it, we've got a small kind of lens per se. There's the actual laser diode. I don't know much about them. And there's a trigger mechanism and the original power cord. And the only thing we're really going to be using is that trigger mechanism. We're going to be modifying it, which basically means that rather than it sort of jumping back into position and it being a flash gun, that's where it often comes from, it will basically be constant but it is going to require some modification to do that. As you can see with the original version, I fixed it so that whenever I pushed it down, whenever the trigger's held down, the laser's down, and that's not burning my hand there. It's not nowhere near focus for that kind of range. I have burnt myself with it. It's not a pleasant thing to do. Do consider eye protection, everybody, if you're going to be playing around with lasers. So to get this trigger out, we've got more Phillips head screws just to get them off these screw posts, and then there's some really sort of microscopic Phillips heads as well to actually get into the actual housing. And as you see, I've cut the wiring off the top, so it's no longer connected to the original laser diode anymore. And we take off the housing. You can see how this mechanism works. Basically, the white bit at the top is a slide that actually flicks the switch, and there's a spring that sort of provides some kind of feedback. But there's a little plastic square that limits how far this spring and this trigger can go. So that's what sort of forced it back into position. So that's why it's a flash whenever you use it on your old Nintendo. So what we want to do is we're going to try and get rid of that little plastic stopper, because it's just restricting too much. See, it just stops, and it only, under the spring pressure, it forces it back. So being very careful not to lose this spring, because if you've ever taken anything apart ever, springs will go missing. Also, that carpet is not the best carpet for losing springs on, let me assure you. And we're just going to lift out the trigger mechanism. You see, we're going to just be careful so we don't lose anything. And this is the tiny bit of plastic we're going to be playing with. You can just see that little tiny plastic knob. Now, I did consider sanding it down with sanding paper, but then I got a bit lazy. So we got a pair of pliers to it, and just used the basic principles of twisty, 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 till the heat built up and it broke off. Now, it's still not flush enough, so I did have to unfortunately get sandpaper to it. You'll be glad to know you don't have to watch me sanding it down all the way, because it did take ages. But there you go, when it's nice and smooth, as you can tell from my grubby fingers sliding across it. So, we're going to reassemble the trigger. Just being careful to get that bit locked in place. You can basically see how it works. It's kind of simple. It's very strange how it's more or less 3 different compounds coming together to basically push a switch. But now when we push down on it, I'm just going to guard that with my finger so it don't fly off. It holds the switch open whenever the trigger's held open, rather than that piece of plastic forcing it back. So, trigger is done. Now to remove all the other bits we don't need. So there goes that lens assembly. It's basically a big piece of lead. There's a weight, another piece of lead. And the original laser diode and power cord. So we're left with just a shell, which the trigger we're going to use is going to go in the same place. And this is an issue. We need to get this down. To grind all this down, I'm using the work sharp, or tool sharp, can't remember which it's called. It's a small belt sander that basically I love. It's used for sharpening tools and knives, but it's really quite useful for big sanding jobs like this. Unfortunately, I forgot to turn the microphone on, so I have to imitate the noise for you. Is that a sander or is that a Wookiee? After about 5 minutes of grinding away with the work sharp, as you can see, lots of lovely chunks of plastic. I've got a relatively flat area to mount the battery pack. So here's the battery pack. As I said, it's just 3 AAAs, and just ground down the edges just so they'll fit a bit better. So the battery pack, it's a bit of a tight fit no matter what, but with the right amount of pressure in the right places, should just click into place. Again, we're just going to knock off melted plastic. Generally comes off pretty easily. If not, I just hit it again usually. There's a bit of a thick bit on the edge there. Let's give that a test fit, shall we? I've also sanded that down a little. I might need to be a bit more aggressive. Yeah, it's just sticking just on that bit there, so I need to be a bit more aggressive with the underside. Almost. Yep. A bit of jiggery pokery. Look how fine that clearance is. My arm stopped shaking, that is. So, unique situation. Melted plastic is now in the way of the trigger mechanism. So, what tool we got for the job? Well, the pliers are too big. What about a screwdriver? So I'm going to break the spring. There we go. The non-lazy person will just open that up again. Now, for actual wiring, I'm actually really terrible at electronics. So, what we're going to do is going to take the red wire from the battery. All I've done is extend it slightly with some heat shrink tubing and the copper off some crocodile clips. Basically just twist them together and then heat shrinked over the top, and that's going to go around the back here, and the trigger is going to sit up covering that. And then the black from the battery terminal is going to go to the black on our laser diode. This is the 4.5 blue laser. It's just going to sit right there where that old weight was. So all we're left now is with some red wires. Now I've extended the one coming from the laser because it wasn't the best quality, where there's lots of copper in the crocodile clips. And all we're going to do is when we drop our trigger in, we're going to block off that back red wire, which is nice and secure. Jiggery pokery as usual. And we're basically going to put this back wire into the top of there, twist it on itself, and then the black one is going to go on the other one. So what is happening now is the circuit is going, or if I was doing this without a camera, it'd be a bit easier, my arm will stop shaking. So the circuit will be going through the actual trigger housing and using that circuit. So in theory, we only ever close the circuit when the trigger is pulled. And there we go. It's not the most finesse of wiring jobs, but it doesn't need to be. So all I've done is put the copper through that top, curled it back on itself and secured it with some tape, and then done the same for the one going to the laser. Now the laser, this is the time you want to take if you've got a focusable one to just test it out. Basically you can go for very short range or very long range. I generally go for short because it's a fire starting tool to me. As someone once asked me, can I set a man who's covered in gasoline on fire with it from across the room? Yes, if I take it apart and readjust it, potentially that could be an option. But for me it's fire starting. And I did consider doing fancy maths to work out from my height what the perfect focus would be for firing down from my waist into a bundle of kindling, but decided it's a fire, it's inevitable, I'm going to be on my knees moving sticks around anyway, so mine's relatively short range and that's how I like it. There we go, bit of a bad tidy up job, but essentially red's out the way around the back, any excess cables have just been bundled together around there, and the laser's sitting where the original weight was. Right, I'm going to screw the trigger back down and then put it all back together again. Now one of the things I'm reminded of when I go to put it back together again is I forgot to grind off these on the other side of the shell, because with those still on there's still not enough room clearance for the battery pack. So while that side is done, I've now got to create room for the shells to sit flush. And that's it all screwed back together again. Now, due to the size of the battery pack, I've had to make a couple of concessions by removing those internal posts that are no longer any screws in the handle. Also, the original power input hole is still there. In fact, when I made this 4 years ago with a red laser, I actually had an on-off key lock there as well as an additional safety. But now we've just got the trigger. So there we go, a working laser inside, and there's Zapper. So let's test what it can do. Now this took a lot more brute force than I would have otherwise been comfortable with to take apart a belt buckle. As you see from the circuit board and all the buttons, it's a 1980s Nintendo pad. But I couldn't just take a pre-made one. I thought, we've got a bit of empty space in there. Let's see if we can make it complement the laser pistol. And as you watch this final clip of my first ever holster project, thank you so much for watching this video on the Captain N inspired laser pistol. If you like the video, please consider liking it, sharing it, subscribing to the channel. There's also a Facebook site and a Twitter feed, and I'm even on Patreon. If you really want to support me, go hunt me down on there. So, as ever, thank you for watching. Get out there and do the impossible every day.